and Deligiu, Corti, Historia, Fin 1, Ascentis 2s for each part. Each part needs its own markers with sequential numbering. I'm structuring this as a 6-part narrative arc, opening with the XM8 prototype and combat failures that expose the M4's limitations, then moving through the development phase where resistance emerges, escalating pressure and setbacks in Part 3, breakthrough moments in Part 4, the cancellation and its immediate impact in Part 5, and finally the vindication and what this legacy means for how we approach innovation. Each part stays between 650–750 words, maintains documentary-style emotional weight, and includes the CTAs you've specified. I need to avoid repeating the call-to-action language from the current rewrites while keeping the same intent, encouraging engagement and sharing. Court, Historia, Initio 1. The testing range was silent, except for the wind. In the dim light of a Virginia facility in the autumn of 2003, a rifle sat mounted on the evaluation bench. Sleek, angular, impossibly modern. Its polymer shell gleamed under fluorescent lights, more sculpture than equipment. It looked like something from 20 years in the future, not something meant for the dust and chaos of Fallujah or the mountain passes of Tora Bora. The XM8 rifle, cradled in its fixture, represented more than advanced engineering. It represented a gamble, that the American military could leap an entire generation ahead, that the future of infantry engagement could be designed in the present, that evolution could be replaced by revolution. What the men who created it didn't yet understand was that revolutions require more than brilliance. They require timing, politics, patience, and luck. And they were about to run out of all four. Thomas Garrett stood in the observation room, watching technicians make final adjustments to the test fixture. At 43, he'd spent 2 decades at Picatinny Arsenal in New Jersey, managing small arms programs. He'd watched service members come home from Mogadishu with jammed M16s. He'd read casualty reports from Kuwait, where rifles overheated in sustained intense exchanges. He'd attended memorial services, where the unspoken truth hung in the air like cordite. Sometimes the tool failed before the operator did. By 2002, American forces were facing conflicts their grandfathers would have recognized, with equipment their fathers had carried. The M16 and its carbine variant, the M4, had served for nearly 4 decades. In the alleys of Mogadishu, the trenches around Kuwait, and now the streets of Kabul, American personnel carried rifles designed during the Vietnam era. They worked, most of the time, but the cracks were showing, jamming in desert sand, overheating during sustained engagements, a platform optimized for 1960s tactics being asked to perform in conflicts where enemy contact could erupt at 700 meters or 7 feet, where one rifle needed to serve as carbine, designated marksman rifle, and squad automatic equipment, depending on the mission. The Army knew what its predecessors had known. Equipment defines conflicts, but it also traps organizations in their own history. Change is expensive, change is risky, and change requires admitting that what worked yesterday might lead to a loss tomorrow. Into that tension stepped a partnership that seemed almost inevitable. Heckler & Koch, the German defense contractor that had quietly revolutionized systems with the G36, the MP5, and a philosophy of modular perfection, and US Army program managers like Garrett, who understood that Afghanistan and Iraq were revealing uncomfortable truths about American infantry capability. They shared a vision: create a rifle system so adaptable, so advanced, so ahead of the curve that it wouldn't just replace the M16. It would make the M16's entire evolutionary lineage obsolete. One platform, multiple configurations, infinite adaptability. The XM8 wasn't designed to be the next rifle. It was designed to be the last rifle anyone would ever need to design. Garrett's colleague, Major Sarah Chen, entered the observation room carrying a folder thick with procurement reviews. Her expression told him everything before she opened her mouth. Budget committee wants projections by Friday, she said quietly. They're asking why we need to replace a platform that's proven effective for 40 years. Garrett didn't look away from the rifle on the test bench. Because proven effective and good enough aren't the same thing, he said, and good enough leads to tragedies. Tell that to the bean counters, Chen replied. They've calculated the cost of replacing millions of rifles in inventory. The number made 3 generals turn pale. Beyond the observation glass, the first test sequence began. The XM8's polymer frame absorbed recoil with mechanical grace. Each round fed smoothly. The integrated optic held 0. The equipment that looked like science fiction performed like precision engineering, but Garrett understood what his younger self hadn't, that innovation requires not just technical excellence, but institutional readiness, political will, and cultural acceptance. And in the bureaucratic arithmetic of military procurement, perception matters as much as performance. The XM8 had technical excellence. What it lacked was time. If stories like this make you question what you do when everyone says you're wrong but you know you're right, tell us in the comments and stay with us for the next chapters. What would you sacrifice to prove the future works? Cort Historia, Fin 1. Cort Historia Inicio 2. The development had begun 18 months earlier in the cold workshops of Heckler & Koch's facility outside Stuttgart, Germany. There, a team of engineers who had spent careers understanding the brutal intersection of metallurgy, ergonomics, and tactical reality asked a deceptively simple question. What if you could build a rifle the way you build Lego? Not by refining a single monolithic design, but by creating a core system with interchangeable components, barrels, stocks, sights, foregrips, that could transform a compact carbine into a designated marksman rifle in minutes in the field with no specialized tools. The answer was radical engineering, polymer construction to reduce weight, integrated sighting systems to eliminate mounting inconsistencies, a kinetic energy operating system derived from the G36, proven in field use across 3 continents. But the true innovation was philosophical. The XM8 wasn't just equipment, it was a complete system. 4 configurations in one: the baseline carbine, the compact version for vehicle crews and special operations, the sharpshooter variant with longer barrel and enhanced optics, the automatic configuration with sustained capacity, every component engineered to the micron, every interface tested to the breaking point. Klaus Hoffmann, the senior engineer whose hands had helped birth the G36, looked at the plastic and carbon fiber prototypes and said what everyone was thinking: we're not designing for today, we're designing for struggles that haven't been imagined yet. The problem with designing for the future, though, is that the present has a vote. Garrett had flown to Germany 6 times in 2002. Each visit deepened his conviction that the XM8 represented exactly what American infantry needed. He'd watched the prototypes perform in conditions that would have destroyed conventional designs. Mud tests, sand immersion, temperature extremes from Arctic cold to desert heat. The equipment kept functioning. Back at Picatinny Arsenal, he'd begun the careful political work of building support. Late nights drafting requirement documents, early mornings briefing generals who'd spent careers married to the M16 platform, lunch meetings with budget analysts who saw only spreadsheets, not personnel in the field. His wife Jennifer noticed the toll first. "You're working weekends again," she said one Saturday morning, finding him at the kitchen table surrounded by test data. "This is starting to feel like the objective individual combat weapon all over again." Garrett flinched. The OICW program, an ambitious attempt to create a next-generation infantry system, had consumed 5 years of his career before political and technical realities shut it down. "This is different," he said. "The XM8 isn't trying to reinvent physics. It's just asking the military to accept that better is possible. And last time you learned that better isn't enough if the institution isn't ready," Jennifer replied gently. "I'm not saying don't fight. I'm saying Remember what it cost you last time. He'd lost a promotion over the OICW, spent 2 years in bureaucratic exile, managing inventory systems, watched younger officers advance, while he paid the price for backing innovation that arrived too soon. But this was different. The XM8 wasn't theoretical. It existed. It worked. And personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan were facing danger because their equipment jammed in sand, overheated in intense moments, and lacked the modularity modern environments demanded. In late 2003, the formal testing began. Accuracy trials at Picatinny, reliability testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground, environmental extremes at Yuma. Each evaluation produced data that made Garrett's case stronger. The XM8 exceeded M4 performance at every range interval. Reliability in dust, mud, and temperature extremes made the legacy platform look fragile. Weight reduction meant personnel could carry more supplies, more water, more of what actually kept them operational. The engineers weren't surprised. They'd spent years ensuring this outcome. But what did surprise them was the resistance, not from the operators, who generally loved the balance and modularity. The resistance came from places they hadn't anticipated: budget analysts who calculated replacement costs, ordnance officers who saw their careers built on maintaining the M16 system, defense contractors who hadn't won the contract and had lobbyists in Washington, and most dangerously, from the quiet institutional inertia of an organization that had spent 40 years learning to think in the language of the M16's specific systems, its maintenance cycles, its supply chains. Colonel Marcus Webb represented that resistance. At a procurement review in January 2004, he laid out his concerns with surgical precision. Polymer durability under sustained operation remains unproven in field conditions. Maintenance practices in deployed environments are inconsistent at best, and we're discussing replacing a platform that has served in every major American effort since Vietnam with a system that looks like it belongs in a video game. The last comment drew quiet laughter from several senior officers. Garrett kept his voice level. "Colonel, every objection you've raised, we've addressed with engineering solutions and test data. The polymer formulation exceeds—" "On paper," Webb interrupted. "Everything works on paper, Major. The question is whether it works when a 19-year-old from Iowa who barely passed basic marksmanship is carrying it through Fallujah in extreme heat." It was a fair point wrapped in institutional contempt, and Garrett had no perfect answer. How do you prove the future works when the present refuses to imagine it? Corte Historia Fin 2. Corte Historia Initio 3. The first cracks appeared in early 2004, not in the rifle, but in the political architecture supporting it. Reports emerged, some legitimate, some suspiciously timed, of reliability issues during extreme testing. A polymer component showed stress fractures after sustained use beyond standard operational loads. A spring mechanism failed in sand immersion tests that no field rifle would ever actually encounter. Each criticism was met with engineering solutions: reinforced polymer formulations, redesigned spring assemblies, modified tolerances. But engineering solutions take time and money, and time was something the XM8 was running out of. In the bureaucratic arithmetic of military procurement, perception matters as much as performance. And the perception growing in the Pentagon was that the XM8, for all its brilliance, represented risk: financial risk, operational risk, political risk. Garrett found himself in conference rooms, defending not just a design, but a philosophy, explaining to men in suits why the future was worth the cost of abandoning the past. Some of those men listened, others had already decided. Meanwhile, the conflict in Iraq intensified. Reports from Fallujah and Ramadi told stories the procurement committees didn't want to hear. Equipment jamming in urban settings, personnel falling while clearing malfunctions, after-action reviews that quietly noted system reliability issues. Sergeant First Class David Torres sent Garrett an email in March 2004. They'd served together briefly in the 1990s, before Garrett had moved to acquisitions and Torres had stayed with infantry units. The email was brief. Major Garrett, heard you're working the XM8 program. Whatever you're doing, do it faster. Lost 2 men last week. One was lost while clearing a double feed. The other was injured because his equipment overheated and he couldn't maintain coverage. The M4 works until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, people are lost. We need better, soon. Torres Garrett printed the email and put it in his desk drawer. Some nights, when the procurement battles felt abstract and endless, he'd read it again to remember what the effort was actually about. But soon wasn't how military bureaucracy worked. By spring 2004, the XM8 program had become a political football. Defense journals that had praised the innovation began running pieces about troubled development. Competitors emerged, systems that promised incremental improvements to the M4 rather than wholesale replacement. Colt, manufacturer of the M4, launched a quiet but effective lobbying campaign. Their message was simple: why risk untested technology when proven platforms can be upgraded? Why spend billions replacing inventory when modifications cost millions? It was seductive logic for budget-conscious officials and risk-averse leaders. Jennifer found Garrett in his home office late one April night, surrounded by briefing slides and test data. "Tom," she said quietly, "you need to sleep." "I will," he replied without looking up. "I just need to finish this analysis for tomorrow's review." "No," she said, sitting across from him. "You need to sleep, and you need to think about whether this effort is one you can actually win." He finally looked at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I've watched you pour everything into this for 2 years. I've watched you miss Emma's soccer games and Jake's school concerts. I've watched you defend a system to people who've already decided they don't want it. And I'm asking, what happens if you lose this time too?" The question hung between them. "Then personnel keep facing danger with equipment that jams in sand," Garrett said quietly. "And I live with knowing I could have prevented that." "Or," Jennifer said gently, "they keep using the tools they've used for 40 years and you move on to an effort you can actually win. You're not responsible for saving the entire army, Tom. You're just one program manager." But that was the problem. He'd seen what better looked like. He'd held the XM8, felt its balance, watched it perform miracles in testing. He'd read Torres's email about men being lost while clearing malfunctions. How do you walk away from that? At Heckler & Koch, Klaus Hoffmann faced similar pressures. The company had invested millions in XM8 development, betting on American procurement. Now that bet looked increasingly uncertain. "We may need to discuss exit strategies," his supervisor said during a tense April meeting. "The political situation in Washington is deteriorating. If the program is halted, we need to salvage what we can." Hoffman stared at the XM8 prototype on his desk. "We designed the system they need," he said. "If they're too blind to see it, that's their failure, not ours." "Noble sentiment," his supervisor replied. "But nobility doesn't pay engineering salaries. Start documenting modular components that could be sold separately or licensed to others." The future was being dismantled before it could arrive. Major Chen stopped by Garrett's office in late April with news he'd been dreading. "Budget committee met yesterday," she said. "They've asked for alternative proposals, modifications to existing M4 platform, other procurement, basically anything except full XM8 adoption." "Based on what criteria?" Garrett demanded. "Based on the criteria that matter in Washington," Chen replied. "Cost, political relationships, institutional comfort with incremental change over revolutionary replacement. In other words, a lack of nerve." Chen's expression softened. "Tom, I believe in the XM8. You know I do. But belief doesn't change appropriations committees. We're fighting doctrine, budget, and politics. Technical excellence isn't enough." Garrett knew she was right, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. "Do you think you'd fight the system for what you believe works, or accept what doctrine says is impossible? comment which path you'd take, and share this episode with someone who loves real innovation stories from history. When you know you're right, but no one with power believes you, how long can you keep fighting? Corte Historia Fin. Corte Historia Initio 4. Summer 2004 brought unexpected hope from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison had just returned from 14 months commanding an infantry battalion in Iraq. He'd lost 11 personnel, some to explosive devices, others to small arms exchanges, and one, Lance Corporal Kevin Martinez, to an equipment malfunction during an engagement in Ramadi. Martinez had been clearing a building when his M4 jammed. While he worked to clear the stoppage, an opponent rounded the corner. Martinez was lost trying to fix his equipment instead of operating it. Morrison attended the memorial service in San Diego, looked the family in the eye, promised them that the loss meant something. Then he drove to Picatinny Arsenal and asked to see the XM8 program manager. Garrett found him in the reception area, still in dress uniform, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "Major Garrett," Morrison said, "I need to talk to you about the system that's going to replace the M4. They spent 4 hours together." Morrison described every equipment failure he'd witnessed in Iraq, the sand jams, the heat stoppages, the maintenance failures, the moments when personnel needed their tools to work and the tools failed them. "I've read the briefings on the XM8, Morrison said. "I've seen the political resistance, and I'm here to tell you that every day we delay this program, we're choosing institutional comfort over lives." "I appreciate that, Colonel," Garrett said carefully. "But right now, institutional comfort is winning." "Then change the battlefield," Morrison replied. "Get me an XM8. Let me take it to Fort Benning. Let infantry instructors see it, feel it, test it. Let the people who actually carry the equipment make the case, instead of the people who make spreadsheets. It was against protocol. Test equipment wasn't supposed to leave controlled evaluation environments." But Morrison wasn't asking for protocol. He was asking for advocacy. Garrett made a call to Klaus Hoffmann. "Can you get us a demonstration unit, full modular capability, something that can survive being handled by 100 infantrymen?" "For what purpose?" Hoffmann asked. "To let the people who matter most see what we've built." There was a long pause. "I can have something at Benning in 2 weeks, Hoffmann said. "Off the books. If anyone asks, it's a foreign military evaluation that happened to stop at a US facility." "Klaus, this could backfire. If the demonstration fails—" "It won't fail," Hoffmann interrupted. "The system works. We just need people who understand the field to see it work." The demonstration at Fort Benning happened on a sweltering July morning. Morrison had quietly arranged for 30 infantry instructors, senior NCOs, and officers with recent combat experience to evaluate the XM8 alongside standard M4 rifles. No formal protocol, no evaluation criteria, just professionals testing equipment and forming opinions. By noon, the consensus was unanimous. The XM8 was better, lighter, more reliable, more adaptable. The modular system that bureaucrats mocked as too complicated took personnel less than 60 seconds to master. Sergeant Major William Cross, who'd served in multiple major theaters, held the XM8 and said what others were thinking. "This is what we should be carrying. Why the hell aren't we?" Morrison looked at Garrett. "That's a question for people above my pay grade, Sergeant Major. But I promise you, we're trying." The Benning demonstration generated quiet momentum. Instructors talked to former students now commanding platoons in Iraq. Word spread through informal networks that bypass official channels. A system the Pentagon was moving to end had become legendary among the people who actually needed it. But legend doesn't change procurement. By August, the political situation had deteriorated further. The Army announced it would continue evaluating alternatives to the M4, language that meant the XM8 was being slowly strangled by bureaucratic process. Chen brought Garrett the memo on a Friday afternoon. "They're not officially ending it," she said. "They're just making sure it fades away through neglect." Garrett read the memo twice, understood what it really said. The institution had decided. Revolutionary change was too expensive, too risky, too far outside the comfort zone of leaders who'd spent careers defending the legacy platform. That night, he drove home and found Jennifer in the garden, tending plants in the late summer light. "They're stopping it," he said. She stood, wiped dirt from her hands, and hugged him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I keep thinking about Torres's email," Garrett said. "About Martinez clearing a malfunction when he should have been engaging. About every person who's going to carry inadequate equipment because the decision-makers care more about budgets than personnel." "You did everything you could," Jennifer said. "Did I? Or did I just prove that doing everything you can doesn't matter when the system doesn't want to change?" They stood together as the sun set over New Jersey. Somewhere in Iraq, personnel were loading magazines and hoping their equipment wouldn't jam when it mattered. Somewhere in Germany, Klaus Hoffmann was staring at XM8 prototypes that represented the future no one wanted to fund. And somewhere in the Pentagon, bureaucrats were writing memos that would ensure the future arrived late, at the cost of those who would never know they'd been spent on institutional inertia. But the story wasn't over yet. The XM8 had one more twist left, though it would take years to arrive, and by then, the men who built it would have moved on to other struggles. Can innovation survive when institutions choose comfort over truth? Corti Historia Finfor. Corti Historia Initio. October 2005 arrived with the bureaucratic inevitability of winter. The Army's official announcement was buried in a routine procurement update. The XM8 program would be discontinued in favor of alternative solutions to infantry modernization. No dramatic press conference, no acknowledgement of a missed opportunity. Just a memo that rendered years of work obsolete with a few paragraphs of carefully neutral language. Garrett read it alone in his office at Picatinny Arsenal. The words blurred together after the third reading. He'd known it was coming, had watched the political support erode month by month, but knowing didn't soften the impact. The system that was supposed to define the next generation had become a footnote, a case study, a cautionary tale about ambition and bad timing. Major Chen found him staring out the window at the testing ranges where the XM8 had performed miracles that no longer mattered. "I'm sorry, Tom," she said quietly. "We were right," he said. "Every test proved it. Every person who handled it loved it. We were objectively, measurably right." "I know. So why does being right feel like losing?" Chen didn't have an answer. Neither did anyone else. At Heckler & Koch, Klaus Hoffmann received the news via email. He'd been expecting it, had already begun documenting modular components for potential licensing to other militaries. But expectation didn't ease disappointment. He looked at the XM8 prototype on his desk, the design that had consumed 3 years of his professional life. It was, he thought, the best infantry system he'd ever helped create, and it would never see the field it was designed for. "We weren't wrong," he said to his reflection in the workshop window. "We were just early. And in military procurement, being early is the same as being wrong." The immediate aftermath was quiet. No protests, no public controversy. The XM8 program simply ceased to exist in official budgets and planning documents. Prototypes were archived, documentation was filed. Engineers moved to other projects. Life went on, except it didn't. Not really. What haunted the architects wasn't the cancellation itself. It was watching history prove them right in slow motion. 6 months after the XM8 ended, personnel in Iraq and Afghanistan began submitting urgent operational needs statements for better reliability. The M4 platform that procurement officials had defended was failing in ways that combat exposed, but peacetime testing had missed. Sand intrusion in Helmand province, heat failures in Baghdad summer, parts breakage during sustained operations, every problem the XM8 had been designed to solve. The Army responded with the SOP mod program, retrofitting M4s with rails and accessories, trying to add modularity to a platform never designed for it. Essentially trying to make the legacy system do what the XM8 had been engineered to do from birth. Garrett watched from the sidelines as the military slowly, expensively, painfully reinvented solutions he'd tried to deliver in 2003. Reports of M4 failures in sustained use led to urgent reliability upgrades, fixes that partially incorporated technologies the XM8 had pioneered. The gas piston system Heckler & Koch had perfected, the polymer construction techniques they'd refined, the modular philosophy they'd championed. Special operations units, freed from conventional procurement processes, began adopting equipment that looked suspiciously like the XM8's philosophy, if not its form: modular, adaptable, mission configurable. The French military adopted the HK-416, a rifle that married the M4's external ergonomics to Heckler & Koch's gas piston system, the same operating principle that had made the XM8 so reliable. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, promoted and commanding a brigade, wrote to Garrett in 2007, "Tom, everywhere I look, I see pieces of the XM8, modified M4s with piston systems, other systems with modular components, foreign militaries adopting designs that look like what we moved away from. We're spending $1 billion recreating what we could have bought in 2005, and people are still in danger with equipment that jams in sand. History's going to judge us harshly for this." Morrison Garrett filed the letter with Torres's email and the original XM8 program proposal, documents of a future that arrived too late. Even the XM8's aesthetic legacy persisted in unexpected ways. That futuristic polymer design became the template for a generation of systems worldwide. All bore the unmistakable influence of the XM8's industrial design philosophy. Media featured it as the tool of tomorrow. Defense contractors studied its modular approach when designing their own next-generation platforms. And when, in 2017, the Army finally launched a program to genuinely replace the M4, the Next Generation Squad Weapon Initiative, the requirements read like a mirror of what the XM8 had promised 14 years earlier: modularity, adaptability, quantum leap in capability. Garrett, now a colonel nearing retirement, read the NGSW requirements and recognized every word. They were his words. Arguments he'd made in 2003, capabilities the XM8 had demonstrated in 2004, needs that personnel had articulated while in the field. The future had finally arrived. It had just cost 14 years and many difficulties that better engineering could have prevented. At a military technology conference in 2018, a journalist asked him about the XM8 program. "Do you regret it?" the journalist asked. "All that work for a design that never saw service?" Garrett paused, choosing words carefully. "I regret that institutional inertia matters more than technical excellence. I regret that personnel carried inadequate equipment for another decade, because bureaucrats feared change more than they feared the consequences of failure. I regret that being right before everyone else sees it feels exactly like being wrong." But the XM8 itself? "The XM8 proved something important," Garrett said. "It proved that innovation is possible, that better is achievable, that we can design for the future if we're brave enough to imagine it." The design failed to launch. The idea survived, and eventually, inevitably, the military came around to what we knew in 2003. Was it worth the cost? That question had no simple answer. Garrett thought of the years consumed, the career damage, the marriages strained. Those who might have had better tools. "Ask the people who'll carry the NGSW when it finally deploys," he said. "They'll be carrying a system that exists because we fought for the XM8. They'll never know our names, they'll never thank us, but they'll benefit from what we tried to build." "That's vindication of a sort," the journalist observed. "It's the only kind that matters," Garrett replied. "What does victory look like when it arrives too late to save the people you are trying to protect?" Court Historia. Fin. Court Historia. Inicio 6. The archives at Picatinny Arsenal preserve history in climate-controlled storage. Row after row of items that changed the landscape or tried to, prototypes of futures that never arrived, testaments to roads not taken. In a secured vault on the third level sit 3 XM8 prototypes, the baseline carbine, the sharpshooter variant, the automatic configuration. They're historical artifacts now. Occasionally, a young engineer or program manager encounters them during research and asks about their story. The answers they receive vary depending on who's telling it. Some frame it as a failure of vision, a military too conservative to embrace necessary change. Others describe it as a success of prudence, an institution that avoided betting its future on unproven technology. The truth, as usual, resides somewhere between the comfortable narratives. The XM8 failed, not because it was flawed, but because it demanded too much change too quickly from an organization built on incremental evolution. Its architects weren't dreamers disconnected from reality. They were engineers who understood reality so well they tried to engineer past it. Klaus Hoffmann retired from Heckler & Koch in 2016. At his farewell dinner, a younger engineer asked him about his proudest achievement. The G-36, probably, someone suggested. That's in service with dozens of militaries. Hoffmann shook his head. The XM8, he said quietly. But that was halted, the young engineer protested. It didn't fail, Hoffmann replied. It succeeded brilliantly. It proved every technical concept we built into it. What failed was the institutional courage to adopt it. Those aren't the same thing. He pulled out his phone, showed them a photo of the XM8 prototype from 2003. Every modern design you see today carries DNA from this system. Every military that demands modularity and adaptability is asking for what we built 15 years ago. We were right. We just had the misfortune of being right before anyone else was ready to admit it. Is that enough? The young engineer asked. It has to be, Hoffmann said, because it's all we get. Thomas Garrett retired from the Army in 2019. His final assignment was as Deputy Director of Infantry Systems, overseeing the NGSW program that would finally, after 16 years, replace the M4 with something better. At his retirement ceremony, Lieutenant General Morrison, now commanding a corps, presented him with a gift, a photograph of the XM8 from the 2004 Benning demonstration. This belongs to you, Morrison said. Every person who'll carry the NGSW owes something to the fight you fought for this design. They'll never know it. But I wanted to make sure you did. Garrett accepted the photo, studied the design that had consumed years of his life. We didn't get there, he said quietly. No, Morrison replied. You planted seeds. They just took longer to bloom than you hoped. That night, in his study at home, Garrett hung the photograph next to Torres's email and Morrison's letter. Documents of a struggle fought in conference rooms instead of field environments. Casualties measured in careers instead of lives. Victory that looked like defeat until history revised the score. Jennifer found him there, staring at the wall of memories. Regrets? She asked. Some, he admitted. I think about the people who faced danger with jammed equipment between 2005 and now. Wonder if the XM8 would have saved them. Wonder if fighting harder, playing politics better, might have made a difference. You gave everything you had, she said gently. I know. I'm just not sure everything I had was enough. They stood together in comfortable silence. The kids asked me what you did in the service, Jennifer said. I told them you tried to give personnel better tools to come home safe. Did it work? Eventually, slowly, imperfectly. Like most important things, what endures isn't the rifle itself, but the questions it forced. Can military innovation happen on revolutionary timelines? Or is warfare too conservative, too grounded in proven doctrine to embrace radical change until crisis forces it? When is the right time to abandon legacy systems? And how do you know when you've crossed from prudent caution into dangerous complacency? The XM8 didn't answer those questions. It became them. A permanent reminder that in the intersection of technology, conflict, and institutional culture, timing matters as much as truth. In 2023, a military historian researching procurement reform contacted Garrett. She wanted to include the XM8 story in a book about innovation setbacks. "I wouldn't call it a failure," Garrett told her. "I'd call it a preview." "How so?" "Because every system that came after it, every modular platform, every push for adaptability, every acknowledgement that personnel need more than their predecessors carried, those are the XM8's legacy. We didn't change the army in 2005, but we changed what the army eventually became." "That's a generous interpretation," the historian observed. "It's the only interpretation that makes the cost bearable," Garrett replied. The historian's book included a chapter titled "Right Too Soon: The XM8 and the Price of Innovation." It quoted Garrett, Hoffman, Morrison, and Chen. It reproduced test data and procurement memos. It told the story of a system that tried to replace the future before the present was ready. The final paragraph read, "The XM8 program teaches us that institutional change operates on timescales, measured in decades, not development cycles. That being technically correct is necessary but insufficient. That innovation requires not just brilliant engineers, but political courage, institutional readiness, and cultural acceptance." The architects who built the XM8 understood something fundamental: that progress in these systems doesn't move in straight lines, and sometimes being right means planting seeds you'll never see bloom. They planted one anyway. In the archives at Picatinny Arsenal, the 3 XM8 prototypes wait in darkness. They'll never function again. They'll never see the field they were designed for. But they endure as testaments to a truth that makes military bureaucrats uncomfortable: that the future exists before institutions are ready to accept it. That better is possible even when doctrine says it isn't. That somewhere, always, someone is building tomorrow's system with yesterday's lesson burned into their minds. Don't just design for the future. Design for the moment the future becomes possible. The XM8 taught them that distinction matters. It might be the most important lesson a halted design ever taught. If this story reminded you that changing the world often means being right before anyone believes you, subscribe to the channel, tell us which country you watch from, and invite someone to revisit history with us in the next story. How do you measure a life's work when the victory arrives too late for you to see it? Corti, Historia, Finks.